So
Sure.
you had an incredible economist on the stand. I thought his testimony was excellent. He got into the nitty gritty of the finances behind Alex Jones and all of his multiple LLCs. We learned through that Alex Jones had withdrawn about $62 million for himself in 2021. And there's questions about where that money went. It seems like he's trying to hide some of his assets. And you had said something that I'm trying to understand a little better. You had mentioned that if he does go through with bankruptcy, it could actually make the compensatory damages cap moot. And I want to understand how that works.
Sure, and I don't think moot is quite the right word. So let me walk this through this because a lot of people are asking about this too. In Texas, there is a $750,000 cap per cause of action and defendant for punitive damages added on to a verdict for mental anguish. In this case, there are 3 causes of action and there are 2 defendants per each cause of action. So that adds up to an additional $4.5 million that can be put on this cap. Along with the $1.5 million sanctions that was already awarded to these plaintiffs, we're talking just about $10 million judgment that they would seek if the cap is applied. Now, clearly we can appeal that cap, and there may have been never a better case to do that under than this case right here, to challenge it on due process grounds. But instead of spending years in the appellate court, what most likely is going to happen is all of these claims are going to be kicked into this bankruptcy court and they're going to have to be valued there. And then because the plaintiff has the ability to maybe appeal that and potentially win, that contingency will need to be factored in, baked into the valuation of the case in the bankruptcy court. And as I said, you're going to be seeing multiple plaintiffs bringing these suits. You've got the Lafferty plaintiffs coming in, that's 9 of them there. 2 more of my clients are going to be bringing another suit after that. Also, there's a young man who was misidentified as the Parkland shooter. He has a claim that I have him representing against Jones. So when all of these plaintiffs finally end up in the bankruptcy court, they're just going to be carving up the pie. And I think from what we've seen, there's a good chance that there's not going to be enough for everybody's verdict, that everybody's going to have to prorate these out anyway. But what it's going to be is the end of InfoWars when that happens. Interestingly enough, most defendants would use that bankruptcy escape hatch as some sort of protection over themselves. In this case, I predict it's going to go the exact opposite. Mr. Jones is going to be subjected to a level of financial scrutiny over his transactions that he has never seen before. And considering what we know has gone down in that courtroom and their ability to tell the truth on the stand there, as well as we know that we now have his text messages, I don't think any of that's going to go very well, particularly once federal receivers are involved.
Right, I mean, he's not a very sophisticated person when he's withdrawing $62 million immediately after the summary judgment finding him guilty of defamation. I mean, the timing is incredible and it's obvious what he's trying to do here. So I am curious to see how it plays out, and anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together can kind of see what he's trying to do. To that point, when it comes to the money that he's able to make by spouting these lies about victims, right? Here we're talking about the Sandy Hook victims, but as you perfectly outlined in the trial, he has spouted similar lies when it comes to other tragedies in this country, including the Boston bombing, other mass shootings. It's actually kind of incredible that it took this long for a lawsuit to be filed against him and for him to lose in the way that he has. But something that stands out to me is that he has made $165 million in just 3 years by selling supplements. And I know that what I'm about to ask you calls for speculation. However,
I'll allow it.
Thank you. Do you think that he's really making that money from selling these weird supplements, or is there a possibility that there's something else more nefarious going on, potentially money laundering?
Yeah, that's something that really is speculation, right? I mean, I see the spreadsheets, I see the numbers, and it's believable on some level that he could be generating that kind of revenue because he's created an intensely loyal fan base. And in fact, I think it's a very low percentage of his viewers that are actually buying these supplements, but they're just buying them hand over fist. The question of what other shenanigans are going on with his money is literally what the next 2-3 months is going to be about. And there's going to be a lot of revelations, that's for sure. And we know he has other revenue streams. We know, for instance, that right before this trial, some anonymous donor threw $8 million in Bitcoin into his account, just out of nowhere. So yeah, we expect to see a lot more surprises. But we also believe, Mr. Jones may not be the best manager of his money. So that revenue may not exactly reflect what he has sitting today. But when you're generating that kind of money, and when you're making these frantic efforts over the past year to try to put a fig leaf over some sort of asset protection plan, yeah, right now the whole house of cards looks very, very vulnerable.
You know, one thing that was disheartening was the moment when Neil Heslin was able to testify, and he was looking forward to that moment because he finally got a chance to kind of confront Alex Jones about what he had done to his family. And Alex Jones, of course, wasn't in the courtroom. And then there was some scheduling mix-up where Jones was in the courtroom when Scarlett Lewis testified, and it was powerful testimony on its own. But what I appreciated about that moment was that she called him out on the lies he continues to tell even as this trial is ongoing. Can you discuss that?
That was an interesting moment, and I actually think of all the many, many mistakes that Mr. Jones made in his legal defense and all of that. Walking into the courtroom before Scarlett Lewis continued testifying was maybe the greatest mistake he made. When he sat down in that chair and she could make eye contact with him on the stand, it galvanized her, and she turned into a symbol of righteousness and a symbol of love and understanding and confusion in the face of what Mr. Jones was doing, and it hit hard. He was walking in and out of that courtroom all the time, just showing up whenever he'd want to, accompanied by a ragtag group of security. It looked weird, but when he sat down there and he did that, by then the case was over. The cross-examination of Jones was just a cathartic moment for everybody. That jury completely understood everything that was going on from the moment Ms. Lewis testified. It was powerful, and I think it's going to live with everybody who was in that courtroom.
Something that was shocking was how first of all, the patience demonstrated by the judge really blew me away. She had patience that I don't think most people would have in response to Alex Jones lying under oath, in regard to Jones and his staffers ignoring her rules. And you did a great job in monitoring what InfoWars was up to during the trial, what they were talking about on the show. So can you discuss what you noticed in their programming? Because it is incredible that they're going through this trial, everyone's focusing on it nationally, and yet they just can't stop themselves from continuing what got them in trouble in the first place.
It was stunning, and I need to give a hat tip here to my consulting expert Dan Friesen of the podcast Knowledge Fight, who I would consider maybe the nation's foremost authority on Alex Jones. And he and his team were monitoring the broadcast during the trial, because I'm in the courtroom, I can't do that. And it's wild to think that during this trial, they had their people on air putting pictures of the judge on fire, calling her a pedophile, saying that the jury is a bunch of blue-collar yokels who don't know what planet they're on, and that's not what we're talking about. There was so much more that happened in the trial. If any of those things happened in a normal trial, that would be the story. But here, there was so much more that those are almost buried in the details. But to actually see that, and talking with the jury particularly afterwards, which they were really willing to talk to us, is they were absolutely mystified that someone would get on and start talking about the trial in that way. I mean, to talk about the trial at all is kind of shocking, but that way, to be able to pull those clips out in the middle of the court to say, you're not taking this seriously. Everything you're doing right now in the courtroom is the same act that you do every single time. And that's why Scarlett was right, is you can sit in this courtroom, you can apologize, you can say you believe I'm 100% real, but the next day you're gonna get on InfoWars and you're gonna say I'm a manipulated agent of the deep state. The same crap keeps on coming. They were telling their viewers that a literal script was being followed for this trial, and a lot of those people believed it.
It's insane.
I can only hope that this really is. It looks like it. I really hope that this is Mr. Jones' exit from the American stage, because even with his reduced reach, his reduced power, all of his fall from grace, he still has command over a frightening amount of people at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And what I'm actually concerned about is, I see Alex Jones and InfoWars as a symptom of a broader problem that we're facing in this country. The lack of trust in our media, I think, is justified, to be quite honest with you. I mean, we critique the corporate media on the show regularly, what they withhold from the American public and all of that. And so I'm worried that we're just dealing with a symptom, although we should definitely deal with this symptom because he's victimizing innocent people. He's traumatizing people who've already been traumatized through terrible, tragic events. But at the same time, if we do away with Alex Jones, is that enough to stop all the grifters that exist in the periphery who make money off of, trafficking these lies about people.
No, it's not. And I'm gonna tell you right now, as a plaintiff's lawyer, I'm not here to save you. I can't. I really can't. And we can punish the people who need to be punished. I'm certainly carrying on the fight. Y'all may know that I'm suing on behalf of Imran Alron, who was maliciously defamed by the Daily Caller and Salem Publishing about this IT hacking scandal in the House that was invented out of nothing. And I'll keep pursuing these kinds of things one at a time, throwing those starfish back into the sea. But I think you and I both know the real answer, which is until we have an American government that provides substantially for the material needs and psychological needs of the American people, they will continue to be vulnerable to this kind of misinformation and manipulation. Until that happens, you're right, it's just a symptom of a much, much bigger problem.
So what do you see happening in the future? Because this is just one of several trials that Alex Jones is gonna have to face as a result of this summary defamation judgment. Can you talk a little bit about what the future holds with the upcoming trials and how you see it playing out?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's gonna depend a lot on what the bankruptcy court does and what happens in the next few weeks when we're up there. If it could turn into a full-blown catastrophe for Mr. Jones, the whole bankruptcy could get dismissed, or the bankruptcy could itself turn into a tar pit he cannot get out of that ultimately pulls him down under. Those courts will probably at some point in the very near future refer both of the cases that are pending in Texas back down to trial, as well as the Connecticut case. And those will get tried to a jury. And then we'll either be right back to a bankruptcy court or we'll be going to those state courts to enforce those judgments. And no path on this looks good for Mr. Jones. There's not a road here that is a protected road where he thinks he's gonna get off of a silver bullet. It's not gonna happen. Somewhere or another, depending on what form it's gonna be, there is a massive reckoning to be coming over the next 4 to 5 months. And that's what's almost sort of poetic about it too, is that this isn't going to be a sudden bang or a whimper, right? This is going to be a long process where Mr. Jones slowly and surely deconstructs. And we plan to help that process along. And at the end of it, yeah, we really believe that Mr. Jones will be gone from the American stage.
You seem like a strong person who can withstand intimidation and threats from Alex Jones's supporters. But I am curious, since you are so public and you've made news with the way that you've handled this case, have you dealt with any threats against you or family members?
Oh yeah, constantly. And it was even earlier in the case. There were things happening where Jones or his lawyer Robert Barnes would get on InfoWars and say stuff about me, and then my phone would get filled up because my email's easily accessible. But what really worried me is I ended up getting messages on my wife's phone, on her text messages, which should not be available. In the wake of this trial, I have an email box. Normally when you get out of trial, it's pretty full because you're ignoring your work. This time it's full of every media organization, tons of fan mail, and more crazy people threatening to kill me than you could possibly believe. I've learned though from my clients, those aren't the people you have to worry about. People who send those impotent messages. It's the ones who never send a message. Right. And so I'm being careful, but it's part of the territory that comes with this job. I know one thing is my clients have seen some heat come off of them. This Sandy Hook hoax lie is now buried, except for the most crazy people in America. Nobody really believes this stuff anymore. They've moved on to other things. So for them, it's nice to see a light at the end of the tunnel. A light where their life can be more about honoring Jesse's memory than trying to fight for the fact that he existed.
Absolutely. I mean, it's sociopathic what they've been doing at InfoWars. I can't imagine further victimizing people who just lost their children in a shooting like this. And again, I just want to go back to what I opened this interview with. Thank you, because it feels good. Even if you're not personally impacted by what Alex Jones is doing, it feels good to see justice for these families. It's been absolutely heartbreaking. And I really hope that they now have the opportunity to heal and put this Alex Jones part of the tragedy behind them. So final question for you, I guess, is, if you could just change one thing about how this has played out. It's played out pretty well, I'm gonna be honest with you, but it's taken years. I mean, 4 years Alex Jones would not cooperate with the discovery process. If there's one thing that you wish could have been different, what would it be?
Absolutely nothing. That 4 years of contempt and disobedience to the court ended up fully funding all of our expenses that we put forward for the Sandy Hook families. We keep saying, well, we were funded by Soros money or anything. No, we didn't need any of that. We paid for it ourselves up front, and then Alex Jones ended up paying for it. And that process kind of revealed the whole rotten edifice of InfoWars. And for it to conclude in this way, in this poetic of a fashion, I wouldn't change a single thing. And I haven't seen these families this happy ever.
I love it. Mark Bankston, you're doing incredibly important work. Thank you so much for speaking with us and giving us a look behind the scenes. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope you'll come back on soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for all you do. Solidarity forever.